The dream. Marcus Adams had always been a man of quiet strength, a decorated Army veteran. He had faced adversity before, but nothing prepared him for the journey he was about to embark on. As he and his wife, Emma, drove through the streets of their small town, the familiar landmarks flashed by. The park where they had their first date, the school their children had once attended, the local diner they'd visited every Sunday for breakfast. This town was their home, but more importantly, it was where they dreamed of opening a restaurant that would bring people together, no matter their background. "Are you ready for this?" Emma asked, her eyes bright with excitement. She had always been the more optimistic of the two, her boundless energy a constant source of encouragement for Marcus. Today, they were on their way to meet a man who could make or break their dreams. Tony Brewer, the owner of the town's most successful restaurant, Brewer's Grill. They hoped to discuss a potential partnership, possibly a franchise opportunity that would allow them to bring their own unique spin on Southern comfort food to life. "I think so," Marcus replied, gripping the steering wheel tightly. This is it, Emma. We've saved for years, planned every detail. If this meeting goes well, everything we've worked for could finally become real." Emma smiled, reaching over to squeeze his hand. "It will go well. You know your stuff, and our ideas are solid. Plus, who could resist your barbecue ribs?" Marcus chuckled, some of the tension leaving his shoulders. Emma had a way of calming him down, reminding him why they were doing this in the first place. They weren't just opening a restaurant for the sake of business. They wanted to create a space where people could feel at home, a place where good food brought folks together. And in a town that was growing more diverse with each passing year, they wanted their restaurant to reflect that inclusivity. As they pulled up to Brewer's Grill, Marcus felt a familiar knot of nerves tighten in his stomach. The building was as imposing as ever, a sleek, modern establishment with a full parking lot, a testament to its popularity. They had been here before, but this time was different. This time, they weren't just customers. They were potential business partners. Marcus and Emma walked inside, greeted by the smell of sizzling steaks and the clatter of dishes. Tony Brewer, a man in his early 60s with graying hair and a thick mustache, stood behind the bar, chatting with a group of regulars. As soon as he saw Marcus and Emma, his expression shifted. He excused himself from the group and approached them with a smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. "Mr. Adams, Mrs. Adams," Tony said, shaking their hands. "Good to see you. I hear you're looking to talk business today." "That's right," Marcus replied, trying to keep his voice steady. "We've been working on plans to open our own place. We've admired what you've built here and thought a partnership might be beneficial for both of us." Tony raised an eyebrow, looking them both up and down. "Partnership, huh? Well, let's have a seat and talk it over." They followed Tony to a private booth in the back, away from the noise of the restaurant. As they sat down, Marcus couldn't help but notice the way Tony kept glancing at Emma, but barely made eye contact with him. It was subtle, but it was there. "So," Tony said, leaning back in his seat, "tell me what you've got in mind." Emma, ever the optimist, launched into their pitch. She explained how they wanted to bring a fresh take on Southern cuisine, blending traditional comfort food with healthier options to cater to the changing tastes of the community. She talked about their commitment to using local ingredients, their plans for community events, and their desire to create a welcoming space for everyone. Marcus added his own thoughts, discussing his background in the military and how his leadership skills would be invaluable in running the business. He was confident in their plan, but as he spoke, Tony's expression remained impassive. When Marcus finished, there was a long pause. Tony scratched his chin, his gaze drifting towards Emma again before finally settling on Marcus. "Look," Tony said, his tone suddenly colder, "I appreciate the enthusiasm, but running a successful restaurant isn't just about cooking good food or having a solid plan. It's about understanding the people who come through your doors." Marcus felt a flicker of unease. "We understand that, Mr. Brewer. We've done our research, and we know the community." Tony's smile was tight, almost condescending. "Do you, though? This town, well, let's just say people here like things a certain way. They like familiarity, comfort. They like knowing what to expect." He leaned forward, his voice lowering. "And to be frank, Marcus, I'm not sure people here are ready for something different." Marcus stiffened, his hands clenching under the table. He knew exactly what Tony was implying, even if he didn't say it outright. "Something different?" Marcus asked, keeping his voice steady. "What do you mean by that?" Tony waved his hand dismissively. "You know what I mean. Look, it's not personal. It's just business. People in this town are set in their ways. They're used to things being a certain way, and I'm not sure they're ready to embrace change." Emma's face flushed with anger, but before she could speak, Marcus cut her off. "With all due respect, Mr. Brewer, I think you're underestimating this community. People here are open to new ideas, and they're ready for something fresh. Our restaurant will bring something unique to the table, something that will resonate with everyone, regardless of their background." Tony's smile faded completely. "I'm not so sure about that, Marcus. I've been in this business for a long time, and I know what works. My advice: stick to what you know. This partnership, I don't think it's going to work out." Marcus felt the sting of Tony's words, but he didn't let it show. He stood up, holding out his hand. "Thank you for your time, Mr. Brewer. We appreciate the opportunity." Tony hesitated for a moment before shaking Marcus's hand, his grip weak. "Good luck," he said, though his tone made it clear he didn't believe they'd succeed. As Marcus and Emma walked out of the restaurant, Marcus's mind was racing. Tony Brewer had made it clear that he didn't think they had what it took, because of who they were, because of the color of Marcus's skin. But Marcus wasn't about to let that stop him. He turned to Emma, his voice firm with determination. "We're doing this, Emma. We're going to prove him wrong." Emma smiled, her eyes shining with pride. "I never doubted it for a second." They got into their car and drove away from Brewer's Grill, the weight of Tony's rejection heavy on their shoulders. But they had something stronger than his doubt. They had each other, and they had their dream. And nothing was going to stand in their way. Facing resistance. The drive home from Brewer's Grill was quiet, the weight of Tony Brewer's rejection settling in the car like a thick fog. Marcus gripped the steering wheel, his knuckles white as he navigated the familiar streets. Emma stared out the window, her normally bright expression dimmed by the bitterness of the encounter. He didn't even try to hide it, did he? Emma finally broke the silence, her voice low and simmering with frustration. He basically said it without saying it. Marcus sighed, nodding. "Yeah, he didn't have to spell it out for us to get the message. But you know, this is nothing new. People like Tony Brewer have been around forever. They think they can size you up with a glance and know everything about you." Emma looked at him, her face softening. "But it still stings, doesn't it? You worked so hard for this. We worked so hard for this." Marcus's jaw tightened as he thought back to the countless late nights, the endless hours they had spent planning every detail of their restaurant. They'd envisioned a space that would embody more than just food. It would represent a beacon of unity in a divided world. Their dream wasn't just about profits or success. It was about creating a place where everyone, no matter their background, could feel welcome. But Tony had made it clear, people like Marcus weren't supposed to dream that big in this town. "It does sting," Marcus admitted, his voice low and measured. "But we knew it wasn't going to be easy. We knew there'd be people like Tony who'd try to shut us down before we even got started. But what he doesn't know is that we're not giving up. Not now. Not ever." Emma reached over and placed her hand on his. "Damn right. We're not. We've come too far to let one person's small-mindedness get in the way." By the time they pulled into the driveway of their modest home, a renewed sense of determination had settled between them. They might not have gotten Tony's approval, but they didn't need it. They would find another way. The next few days were filled with activity. Marcus and Emma made calls to potential investors, researched local grant opportunities, and even scouted for possible locations for their restaurant. But despite their best efforts, they hit roadblock after roadblock. Every investor they spoke to seemed hesitant, offering vague excuses about their lack of experience or the timing not being right. Marcus could sense the unspoken reason behind their rejections: his skin color. No one said it outright, but it was there, lurking beneath the surface of every polite refusal. Emma was starting to feel the pressure too. "It's like no one will even give us a chance," she said one evening as they sat at the kitchen table, going over their budget for the 100th time. "I thought the hardest part would be getting the recipes right, not convincing people that we deserve a seat at the table." Marcus leaned back in his chair, rubbing his temples. "I know. It's frustrating. But we can't let it get to us. There has to be someone out there willing to take a chance on us." Their persistence was tested over the next several weeks. Each morning, Marcus woke up early and made calls to more potential investors. He fine-tuned their business plan, adjusting it to highlight their strengths and their vision. Emma kept perfecting the menu, experimenting with new dishes that blended traditional Southern flavors with innovative, healthy twists. But no matter how hard they worked, every door seemed to close before they could even knock. One evening, after another round of rejection emails, Marcus found himself staring at the ceiling in their bedroom, the weight of failure pressing down on him. Emma lay beside him, her breathing steady as she slept. She had been his rock throughout this entire process, always believing in him, always pushing them forward, even when things seemed impossible. Marcus hated the idea of letting her down. He hated the idea of giving up. But as the days dragged on, and the obstacles seemed insurmountable, a small voice in the back of his mind began to whisper doubts. Maybe Tony was right. Maybe the town wasn't ready for someone like him to succeed. Maybe they didn't want him to. He closed his eyes, trying to push those thoughts away. But they lingered, gnawing at the edges of his resolve. The next day, Marcus and Emma decided to visit the town's business district to explore available commercial spaces. They had passed by a few storefronts before, but hadn't seriously considered any of them, thinking they needed to secure funding before making any moves. Now, with so many investors turning them down, they felt they needed a visual anchor for their dream, something to keep them motivated. As they walked down Main Street, Marcus noticed a small vacant building tucked between a bakery and a bookstore. The exterior was old and weathered, the windows dusty from disuse, but there was something about it that caught his eye. "Hey," Marcus said, stopping in front of the building. "What do you think of this place?" Emma looked up at the building, her eyes narrowing in thought. "It's a little rough around the edges, but I don't know. I kind of like it." Marcus nodded. "Me too. It's not fancy, but it's got character. And it's right in the heart of town. A lot of foot traffic." Emma smiled, a spark of excitement returning to her eyes. "Yeah, I can see it now. The sign out front, the smell of food wafting out, people sitting outside on a warm day." Marcus's heart lifted at the vision. For the first time in weeks, he felt a surge of hope. Maybe this was the place. Maybe this was where their dream could finally take root. They called the real estate agent listed on the for lease sign and scheduled a meeting for the next day. Marcus spent the rest of the afternoon researching the building's history and potential renovation costs, while Emma brainstormed ideas for the interior design. They felt a renewed sense of purpose, and for a brief moment, it felt like things were falling into place. The following day, they met with the agent, a middle-aged woman named Denise, who seemed genuinely interested in their vision for the space. She gave them a tour of the building, pointing out its features and explaining what work would need to be done to bring it up to code. The building was old but structurally sound, and with a little work, it could be transformed into something special. "We're really excited about this space," Emma said as they wrapped up the tour. "It's exactly what we've been looking for." Denise smiled. "I'm glad to hear that. I think this could be a great fit for your concept. The landlord is flexible on the lease terms too, so if you're interested, we can start the paperwork." Marcus felt a flicker of excitement. This was it. They were finally moving forward. As they stood outside, discussing the next steps, Marcus noticed a familiar figure across the street, Tony Brewer, leaning against his car, watching them with a frown. His presence sent a chill down Marcus's spine. "Is that Tony?" Emma asked, following Marcus's gaze. "Yeah," Marcus muttered. "I guess he's keeping tabs on us." Tony stared at them for a moment longer before getting into his car and driving off. His departure left an unsettling feeling in Marcus's chest, but he pushed it aside. They had more important things to focus on. The next few weeks were a whirlwind of activity. Marcus and Emma signed a lease for the building and immediately got to work on the renovations. They hired a contractor to handle the major repairs, but much of the interior work, painting, installing fixtures, designing the layout, they did themselves. It was exhausting, but it felt good to finally be working towards something tangible. But as the renovation progressed, so did the resistance. One day, as Marcus was unloading supplies from his truck, he noticed a group of men lingering near the front of the building. They were talking quietly, their eyes fixed on Marcus. He recognized a few of them. They were regulars at Tony Brewer's restaurant. "Something I can help you with?" Marcus asked, his tone polite but wary. One of the men, a tall, burly guy with a grizzled beard, stepped forward. "We were just wondering what you're doing here, Marcus. This place, it's been empty for a while." "We're opening a restaurant," Marcus replied, keeping his voice steady. "Emma and I are putting something new together." The man raised an eyebrow. "A restaurant, huh? You sure about that? This town's already got a good one. Tony's Place. Everyone goes there." Marcus smiled tightly. "Yeah, we know. But we think there's room for something different." The man chuckled, his eyes cold. "Maybe. But you know, people around here don't like change all that much. Just saying. It might not be worth your trouble." Marcus met the man's gaze, refusing to back down. "Well, we'll see about that." The man smirked, then turned to rejoin his group. "Good luck, Marcus. You're gonna need it." As the group walked away, Marcus felt a knot of anger twist in his chest. It wasn't just Tony Brewer who was against them. There were others too. People who didn't want them to succeed, who would rather see them fail than disrupt the comfortable status quo. He clenched his fists, his resolve hardening. They could try to intimidate him, but they wouldn't break him. He had faced worse in his life, and he wasn't about to let a few narrow-minded people stand in his way. Over the next few weeks, the resistance grew stronger. Marcus and Emma started noticing strange things happening around the construction site. Tools would go missing, equipment would be tampered with, and graffiti appeared on the walls overnight. The messages were clear: "You don't belong here." At first, Marcus tried to brush it off, but Emma could see the toll it was taking on him. She saw the way his shoulders tensed whenever they arrived at the site, the way he stayed up late, worrying about what might happen next. One evening, after a particularly long day, Emma found Marcus sitting on the front steps of the building, his head in his hands. She sat down beside him, wrapping her arm around his shoulders. "We'll get through this," she said softly. Marcus sighed, leaning into her. "I don't know, Emma. It feels like the whole town is against us. Every day, it's something new. And Tony, he's watching us. I know he's behind some of this." Emma was silent for a moment. Then she spoke, her voice firm. "We didn't come this far to quit, Marcus. You've faced tougher battles than this. We're going to make this work, no matter what." Marcus looked at her, his heart swelling with gratitude and love. Emma had always been his strength, his anchor. She believed in him, even when he doubted himself. "You're right," Marcus said, his voice steady. "We'll keep pushing. We'll show them what we're made of." They stood up together, staring at the building that would one day be their restaurant. It wasn't going to be easy, but nothing worth having ever was. Allies in unexpected places. The next morning, the sun was barely up when Marcus found himself standing in front of the restaurant, staring at the graffiti that had appeared overnight. The bright red letters screamed at him, "Go home." The words hit hard, even though they were just scrawled on the wall, an ugly reminder of the resistance they were up against. For a moment, he just stood there, the silence of the early morning pressing in around him. He had expected challenges, but not this, never this. It wasn't just about opening a restaurant anymore. It was about proving that they belonged, that they had a right to their dream, just like anyone else. Emma joined him, her face tight with anger as she surveyed the damage. "They think they can scare us off with this," she said, her voice trembling. "But they've got another thing coming." Marcus nodded, but the weight of the situation pressed heavily on his chest. They were running out of money for repairs, and every new act of vandalism set them back even further. Between that and the resistance from Tony Brewer and his cronies, it felt like the entire town was conspiring to shut them down before they even had a chance to open. As they cleaned the graffiti off the walls, Marcus's phone buzzed in his pocket. He wiped his hands on his pants and pulled it out, frowning at the unfamiliar number on the screen. "Hello," he answered, trying to keep his voice steady. "Is this Marcus Adams?" The voice on the other end was deep, calm, but unfamiliar. "Yeah, this is Marcus. Who's calling?" "This is Andrew Mitchell. I'm the mayor's aide. I was hoping to set up a meeting with you and your wife." Marcus's heart skipped a beat. He had heard of Andrew Mitchell, a trusted advisor to Mayor Henry Davis. For him to be calling was unexpected, but maybe it was a sign that things were about to turn around. "A meeting?" Marcus asked, exchanging a look with Emma, who raised an eyebrow in curiosity. "With the mayor?" "That's right," Andrew said, his tone professional but warm. "Mayor Davis has heard about your efforts to open a restaurant, and he'd like to discuss some ways the city might be able to help. Could you and your wife come by City Hall tomorrow morning?" Marcus was stunned. This was exactly the kind of support they needed, but he hadn't expected it to come from the mayor's office. "Absolutely," Marcus replied, his voice steady despite the surge of hope rising in his chest. "We'll be there." After he hung up, Emma looked at him expectantly. What was that about? Marcus grinned, feeling a spark of excitement for the first time in days. "We've got a meeting with the mayor tomorrow." Emma's eyes widened. "The mayor? What for?" "He wants to talk about how the city can help us," Marcus said, still trying to process it himself. "This could be the break we've been waiting for, Emma." Emma smiled, relief flooding her face. Maybe the tide's finally turning. The next morning, Marcus and Emma arrived at City Hall, feeling a mixture of nerves and anticipation. The grand old building loomed above them, its brick facade an imposing reminder of the history and power it held. They were ushered into a small conference room where Mayor Davis, a tall man with salt and pepper hair and a thoughtful expression, was waiting for them. Andrew Mitchell, the aide who had called Marcus, stood beside him, offering a polite nod as they entered. "Mr. and Mrs. Adams, thank you for coming," Mayor Davis said, standing to shake their hands. "Please, have a seat." "Thank you for having us, Mayor," Marcus replied as they sat down, still trying to gauge the situation. He wasn't sure what to expect from this meeting, but he was determined to make the most of it. "I've heard about the troubles you've been facing with your restaurant," Mayor Davis began, his tone serious but not unkind. "And I want to say up front that I'm deeply sorry for the way some people in this town have treated you. This kind of behavior has no place in our community, and it's not representative of who we are." Marcus felt a knot of tension begin to loosen in his chest. Just hearing those words, from the mayor, no less, was like a balm to the wounds they had been carrying. "Thank you," Marcus said quietly. "It's been hard, but we're not giving up. We believe in what we're doing." "I can see that," the mayor said with a nod. "And I admire your determination. That's why I wanted to meet with you today. I believe the city can help you overcome some of the obstacles you've been facing." Marcus and Emma exchanged a glance, hope flickering between them. "I've spoken to a few people who might be able to offer support," Mayor Davis continued. "There's a local development grant you may qualify for, which could cover some of the costs for repairs and renovations. And we've been working on a new initiative to promote small businesses in underrepresented communities. I think your restaurant could be a perfect fit for the program." Emma's eyes lit up. "That would be amazing," she said, her voice filled with gratitude. "We've been struggling with the costs, especially with everything that's been happening." Mayor Davis smiled. "I'm glad to hear you're interested. We can get the ball rolling on the application process right away. And I want you to know that you have my support. And the city's support, moving forward. We want to see your business succeed." Marcus could hardly believe what he was hearing. After weeks of resistance and rejection, they were finally being offered real help from the highest office in the town. It felt like a lifeline had been thrown to them just as they were starting to sink. "We're so grateful, Mayor," Marcus said, his voice thick with emotion. "This means more to us than you can know." "I'm happy to help," Mayor Davis replied, standing up to shake their hands again. "I'll have Andrew follow up with you on the details, and if you ever need anything else, don't hesitate to reach out." As they left City Hall, Marcus and Emma felt a renewed sense of hope. It wasn't just about the grant or the business initiative. It was about knowing they weren't alone in this fight. For the first time, it felt like they had powerful allies in their corner. In the weeks that followed, things began to turn around. The grant application went through smoothly, and soon they received the much-needed funds to cover the damage from the vandalism. With the financial burden eased, Marcus and Emma were able to focus on finishing the renovations and getting the restaurant ready for its grand opening. But the support didn't stop there. Word of Mayor Davis's backing spread quickly, and soon other members of the community started showing their support as well. Local businesses offered discounts on supplies, and several residents even volunteered to help with the finishing touches on the restaurant. One afternoon, as Marcus was working on the outdoor patio, a woman approached him, her arms full of paint supplies. "Hi there," she said with a friendly smile. "I'm Sarah, from the bookstore next door. I heard about what you've been going through, and I just wanted to say, if you ever need any help, I'd be happy to lend a hand." Marcus was taken aback. He had seen Sarah around the neighborhood, but they had never spoken before. "Thank you, Sarah," Marcus said, genuinely touched by her offer. "That means a lot." "Don't mention it," she replied, setting down the supplies. "I've always thought this town needed more places like what you're building. Something different, you know. A place where everyone feels welcome." Marcus smiled. "That's exactly what we're trying to do." As more neighbors and local business owners reached out to offer their help, Marcus and Emma realized they weren't as isolated as they had once thought. Sure, there were people like Tony Brewer and his group, but there were also people who believed in them, people who wanted to see them succeed. As the opening day of their restaurant approached, Marcus and Emma were filled with a mixture of excitement and nerves. Everything was in place. The kitchen was fully equipped, the staff was trained, and the menu had been finalized after months of careful planning and taste tests. But there was still one lingering question in Marcus's mind. Would people show up? They had faced so much opposition, and while the support from the community had been heartening, Marcus couldn't shake the fear that on opening day, the restaurant would be empty. Emma sensed his unease as they stood together in the dining area, the night before the grand opening. "You're worried, aren't you?" she asked softly, leaning her head against his shoulder. Marcus sighed. "Yeah, I know we've done everything we can, but what if it's not enough? What if no one shows up?" Emma took his hand, squeezing it gently. "People will come, Marcus. They've seen how hard we've worked, and they believe in what we're doing. Besides," she added with a playful smile, "I've seen the way people's faces light up when they taste your ribs. No one's missing out on that." Marcus chuckled, the tension easing just a bit. "I guess we'll find out tomorrow." Opening day dawned bright and early, and Marcus and Emma arrived at the restaurant hours before the doors were set to open. They made sure everything was perfect. The tables were set, the kitchen was stocked, and the staff was ready to go. As the clock ticked closer to opening time, Marcus felt his heart race. He stood at the window, watching the street outside. And then, just as the doors were about to open, something incredible happened. People started arriving. At first, it was just a few curious passers-by, peeking in to see what the new place was all about. But then more people came, families, couples, groups of friends, all eager to try out the new restaurant. Some had heard about it from Mayor Davis's initiative, others from local buzz, but all of them were there because they believed in Marcus and Emma's vision. The restaurant quickly filled with the sounds of laughter, clinking glasses, and the sizzle of food on the grill. The air was thick with the mouth-watering aromas of barbecue, fried chicken, and fresh cornbread. Marcus moved through the dining room, checking in with customers, making sure everyone was enjoying their meal. As he passed one table, he overheard a conversation that made him stop in his tracks. "This place is amazing," one woman said, smiling as she took a bite of her pulled pork sandwich. "I love that it's not just about the food. It feels like a real community here." Her friend nodded in agreement. "Yeah, and it's about time we had something like this. I'm so glad they didn't let the haters stop them." Marcus smiled to himself, his heart swelling with pride. They had done it. Against all odds, they had created something special, something that brought people together. Later that evening, after the restaurant had closed for the night, Marcus and Emma stood in the now quiet dining room, the hum of the day's success still buzzing in their ears. "We did it," Marcus said, his voice filled with wonder. "I can't believe it, but we actually did it." Emma smiled, leaning her head on his shoulder. "I never had any doubt." They stood there for a moment, basking in the glow of their accomplishment. It had been a long, hard road, but they had made it to the other side. And the best part, they hadn't done it alone. Along the way, they had found allies, people who believed in their dream just as much as they did. As they locked up and headed home, Marcus couldn't help but think about the future. They had won this battle, but there would be more challenges ahead. But now, they knew they had the strength and the support to face whatever came next. The pushback. The success of Marcus and Emma's restaurant was undeniable. From the day they opened their doors, the restaurant had been bustling with customers. Word of mouth spread quickly, with locals praising not only the food but the warm, welcoming atmosphere. Their dream was finally becoming a reality, and for the first time in months, they felt like they were truly a part of the community. But as the days turned into weeks, the joy of their success began to attract a different kind of attention: jealousy and resentment. Not everyone was pleased to see Marcus and Emma thriving, especially those who had been counting on their failure. Among them was Tony Brewer, whose own restaurant, Brewer's Grill, had seen a noticeable drop in customers. Once the town's go-to spot for comfort food, Tony's Diner was now struggling to compete with the fresh energy and vibrant atmosphere of Marcus and Emma's place. Tony, a man who had built his success on control and tradition, couldn't stand the thought of being outdone by Marcus, a man Tony had written off as undeserving from the start. Tony's resentment simmered quietly at first, but as the weeks passed, it grew into something darker. He started to hear whispers around town, people talking about how Marcus's restaurant was better, how they felt more welcome there, how the food had more heart. It gnawed at him. Every time he saw one of his regulars walk past his diner to eat at Marcus's, the bitterness inside him deepened. Then there was Brad and his group of cronies, who had once been the loudest voices of opposition against Marcus and Emma. Brad, who had vandalized the restaurant in secret, had been publicly humiliated when his actions were discovered, and though Marcus and Emma had chosen to forgive him, his pride had never recovered. He hadn't been able to face them since, but that didn't mean he'd given up his grudge. In fact, he had retreated to the shadows, plotting his next move with renewed determination. The atmosphere in town began to shift. What had once been subtle resistance was now becoming open hostility. It started with small things, sideways glances from people who used to smile, cold shoulders from other business owners who had once been friendly. Marcus noticed that whenever he ran errands in town, the conversation around him would suddenly hush, as if people were talking about him and Emma behind their backs. At first, Marcus tried to ignore it. He had always been the kind of man who believed in rising above petty conflicts. But as the hostility grew, it became harder to pretend it wasn't there. One day, as Marcus was loading supplies into the back of the restaurant, a man approached him from the alley. Marcus recognized him immediately. Gary, one of Brad's close friends and a regular at Brewer's Grill. He had the look of a man who always felt the world owed him something, and Marcus had never liked the way Gary sneered at him whenever they crossed paths. "What do you want, Gary?" Marcus asked, his voice steady but guarded. Gary leaned against the brick wall, folding his arms across his chest. "I hear business is booming," he said, his tone thick with sarcasm. "It's going well," Marcus replied cautiously, not sure where this was going. "Is there something you need?" Gary smirked, pushing off the wall and taking a few steps closer. "I was just thinking," he said slowly, "about how you've been running things around here. You know, you're new to this whole business thing. Maybe you're not aware, but there are rules in this town. Unspoken ones." Marcus raised an eyebrow. "Rules?" Gary nodded, his eyes narrowing. "Yeah, rules about knowing your place, about respecting those who've been around longer. See, some folks don't take too kindly to upstarts, especially when they start taking business from the wrong people." Marcus clenched his jaw, realizing exactly what Gary was implying. "I'm just running my business, Gary. We're not trying to take anything from anyone." Gary chuckled darkly. "That's not how it looks to some folks. Looks to me like you're stepping on some toes. People are getting angry, Marcus. Real angry. Might be best if you cool things down a bit, you know. Maybe not be so successful." Marcus stared at him, the meaning behind his words sinking in. Gary wasn't just giving a warning. This was a threat. And it wasn't just about Marcus and Emma's success. It was about the power dynamics in the town, about people like Gary and Brad and Tony not wanting to see someone like Marcus, someone they saw as an outsider, succeed. "You're saying we should fail on purpose?" Marcus asked, his voice low and steady. "I'm saying," Gary replied, his voice turning cold, "that if you keep pushing, things might get a little harder for you. Accidents happen, businesses lose their footing. Wouldn't want to see that happen to you." Marcus felt a rush of anger, but he kept his expression calm. He had dealt with bullies before, and he wasn't about to be intimidated now. "Thanks for the advice, Gary," he said coolly, "but we're going to keep doing what we're doing." Gary's eyes flickered with anger, but he forced a smile. "Suit yourself," he said with a shrug, "but don't say I didn't warn you." As Gary walked away, Marcus stood there for a long moment, trying to process what had just happened. He knew they had faced resistance before, but this was different. This wasn't just about people not liking them. This was about people actively trying to sabotage their success. That night, Marcus sat down with Emma in their living room, the weight of Gary's threat pressing on him. He hadn't told her about the encounter yet, not wanting to worry her, but he knew they needed to talk about it. "Emma," he began slowly, "I think we've got a bigger problem than we thought." Emma looked up from her laptop, concern immediately clouding her face. "What do you mean?" Marcus took a deep breath and told her everything. About Gary's visit, the thinly veiled threats, and the growing hostility they had been noticing around town. Emma listened in silence, her face growing more serious with every word. When Marcus finished, she leaned back in her chair, crossing her arms. "They're trying to scare us," she said finally, her voice firm. "They don't want us to succeed, so they're trying to push us out." "I know," Marcus said, running a hand through his hair. "But what do? We can't just back down. If we give in now, they win." Emma sat forward, her eyes fierce with determination. "We don't back down, Marcus. We've worked too hard for this. If they think they can intimidate us, they've got another thing coming." Marcus smiled, the fire in Emma's eyes giving him strength. "You're right," he said. "We're not going anywhere." Over the next few days, Marcus and Emma braced themselves for more pushback. They kept an eye on their supplies, making sure nothing was tampered with, and they were careful about who they let into the kitchen. But despite their precautions, the hostility continued to grow. One afternoon, a local food blogger came in to review the restaurant. She was well known in the community, and a positive review from her could be a huge boost for their business. Marcus and Emma welcomed her warmly, and she seemed impressed with the atmosphere and the menu. But halfway through her meal, something strange happened. The food, which had been prepared perfectly just minutes earlier, suddenly tasted off. The blogger, who had been enjoying her meal, grimaced as she took a bite of her entree. "I'm sorry," she said, pushing the plate away, "but there's something wrong with this. It tastes bad. Like it's gone bad." Marcus was stunned. They had checked everything in the kitchen that morning. There was no way the food had gone bad. But sure enough, when they checked the dish, the meat had a strange, sour taste. Marcus couldn't figure it out. How could this have happened? The blogger left with a lukewarm review, and Marcus and Emma were left scrambling to figure out what had gone wrong. It wasn't until they reviewed the security footage from the kitchen that they found the answer. One of the new kitchen assistants, a young man named Jeff who had recently been hired, had been acting suspiciously. The footage showed him adding something to the food when no one was looking. Marcus confronted Jeff the next day, and the truth came out. Jeff had been paid by Tony Brewer to sabotage the restaurant. He had been slipping souring agents into the food, trying to ruin their reputation. Marcus was furious, but he didn't let his anger show. Instead, he fired Jeff on the spot and made it clear that if anything like this happened again, there would be legal consequences. Word of the sabotage spread quickly through the town, and while many people were shocked, others weren't surprised. Tony Brewer had always been ruthless in protecting his business, and it seemed that now he was willing to go to any lengths to bring Marcus and Emma down. The final straw came one night when Marcus and Emma were closing up the restaurant. It had been a busy day, and they were both exhausted. As they locked up and headed to their car, they noticed a group of men standing across the street, watching them. Marcus recognized them immediately: Brad, Gary, and a few other men from Tony's circle. They were standing in the shadows, their faces hidden, but Marcus could feel the menace in their gaze. "Stay close," Marcus said quietly to Emma as they approached their car. Just as they were about to get in, one of the men called out, "You think you're better than us, huh?" Marcus stopped, turning to face them. "What's your problem?" he asked, his voice calm but firm. "Our problem." Brad stepped forward, his face twisted with anger. "Our problem is you coming in here and acting like you own the place, like you can just waltz in and take what's ours." Marcus stared at him, his heart pounding. "I'm not taking anything from you. I'm just running my business." Brad scoffed. "Your business? This town doesn't need your kind of business." Emma stepped forward, her voice sharp. "Our kind of business? What's that supposed to mean?" "You know damn well what it means," Brad snarled. "People like you don't belong here. You're outsiders. You don't get to come in here and change things." Marcus felt his blood boil, but he forced himself to stay calm. "This town is changing whether you like it or not. We're not going anywhere." Brad took a step closer, his fists clenched. "Oh, you're going somewhere. All right. You either leave on your own, or we'll make sure you're run out of town." The threat hung in the air, thick with tension. Marcus knew they were outnumbered, but he wasn't about to back down. "We're not leaving," Marcus said firmly. "And if you try to come after us, you'll regret it." Brad's eyes narrowed, and for a moment, it looked like he was about to lunge at Marcus. But then, from down the street, a police car rounded the corner, its headlights cutting through the darkness. Brad hesitated, then sneered. "This isn't over," he growled, before turning and walking away with his group. Marcus and Emma stood there for a long moment, the adrenaline coursing through them. They had known the pushback was coming, but this felt like the beginning of something much more dangerous. "We need to be careful," Emma said quietly, her hand shaking slightly as she gripped Marcus's arm. "This is getting worse." "I know," Marcus replied, his voice steady, "but we're not backing down. Not now." They got into the car and drove home in silence, the weight of the night pressing heavily on them. They had come so far, but the fight was far from over. And they knew, deep down, that the worst was yet to come. A dangerous confrontation. The tension in the air was palpable. Ever since the confrontation with Brad and his group, Marcus and Emma had been living under a cloud of unease. Each day at the restaurant, they could feel the eyes of those who resented their success watching them, waiting for them to slip up. But instead of breaking under the pressure, Marcus and Emma continued to push forward, determined not to let fear control them. However, things took a darker turn as the weeks passed. The subtle acts of sabotage became more frequent and brazen. First, someone slashed the tires on their delivery truck, delaying critical supplies. Then their power was mysteriously cut in the middle of a busy Friday night, forcing them to close early and send dozens of disappointed customers home. Every setback cost them time, money, and worst of all, their peace of mind. Emma remained a pillar of strength throughout it all, refusing to let the hostility break her spirit. But Marcus could see the toll it was taking on her. Her smiles were less frequent, and she started having trouble sleeping, waking up in the middle of the night with her mind racing. Marcus felt the weight of the situation too, the stress gnawing at him. He was constantly on edge, wondering when the next attack would come. One evening, after a particularly grueling day, Marcus sat alone at the bar in the now quiet restaurant, nursing a glass of water as he replayed the events of the past few months in his head. They had come so far, fought so hard, but there was a growing sense that their enemies were closing in, tightening the noose around their necks. Emma emerged from the kitchen, her apron still on, and sat beside him. "You're quiet tonight," she said softly, giving him a sidelong glance. Marcus sighed, staring at the glass in his hands. "I'm just tired, Emma. Tired of all this. I thought the hardest part would be opening the restaurant, but it feels like the real battle didn't start until after we opened." Emma nodded, her expression serious. "I know. It's exhausting. But we knew this wasn't going to be easy. People like Brad and Tony, they're scared of us. They're scared of change." Marcus let out a bitter laugh. "Scared of change. They're doing more than just being scared, Emma. They're actively trying to destroy us. And they're getting bolder." Emma was quiet for a moment, then placed a hand on his shoulder. "We've faced worse, Marcus. You've faced worse. We've survived everything they've thrown at us so far. We can't give up now." Marcus looked at her, his heart swelling with love and admiration for her strength. "You're right. But I'm worried, Emma. This feels different, like they're building up to something." As if on cue, Marcus's phone buzzed on the counter. He picked it up, frowning at the unknown number on the screen. "Hello. Marcus Adams." The voice on the other end was cold, unfamiliar. "Yeah, this is Marcus. Who's this?" The voice chuckled darkly. "You don't need to know that. Just listen. You and your wife need to close that restaurant down. For good. Leave town while you still can." Marcus's blood ran cold. "Is this Brad? Or Tony? What do you want?" The voice ignored his question. "This is your final warning, Marcus. You don't belong here. Pack up and leave before things get ugly. We don't want your kind here. And if you don't leave on your own, we'll make sure you have no choice." Marcus's heart pounded in his chest as the line went dead. He stood there, stunned, the phone still clutched in his hand. "What is it?" Emma asked, her voice tense. Marcus shook his head, trying to calm himself. It was a threat. Someone telling us to close the restaurant and leave town. Emma's eyes widened in shock. Who? Was it Brad? Marcus shrugged, feeling the knot of fear and anger tighten in his chest. I don't know. It could be him, or Tony, or one of their guys. But they're serious, Emma. They're not just trying to scare us anymore. They want us gone, and they're willing to do whatever it takes. Emma sat back in her chair, her face pale but determined. So, what do we do? Marcus's mind raced. Every instinct told him to protect Emma, to get her out of harm's way. But he knew that leaving town wasn't an option. They had invested everything into this restaurant. Time, money, their entire future. Leaving would mean giving up on their dream and letting the people who hated them win. We stay, Marcus said firmly, his voice resolute. We're not running. But we need to be smart about this. I'm going to talk to the police, see if they can keep an eye on the place, and maybe we can hire some extra security, just in case. Emma nodded, though Marcus could see the worry in her eyes. Okay, but be careful, Marcus. I don't like this. I'll be careful, Marcus promised, taking her hand. We'll get through this, Emma. We always do. The next morning, Marcus went to the local police station to report the threatening call. Officer Hendricks, a middle-aged man with a gruff but fair demeanor, listened attentively as Marcus explained the situation. I've heard about what's been happening around your restaurant, Hendricks said, leaning back in his chair. You've been dealing with a lot of trouble lately. Vandalism, sabotage. It's clear someone's got it out for you. Marcus nodded. It's been getting worse, and now we're getting direct threats. Hendricks rubbed his chin thoughtfully. It sounds like whoever this is, they're escalating. And that's dangerous. We can keep an extra patrol in your area, but we can't be there all the time. I understand, Marcus replied, trying to hide his frustration. But I'm worried about what might happen next. Hendricks nodded. I get it. My advice: keep your security tight. Install cameras. Keep records of everything. And if anything else happens, report it immediately. We'll do our best to help, but it's important you protect yourselves too. Marcus thanked the officer and left the station feeling only slightly better. The police could help, but they weren't going to stop Brad or Tony if they decided to take things to the next level. Marcus knew that he and Emma were going to have to take matters into their own hands. In the days that followed, Marcus and Emma tightened security around the restaurant. They installed additional cameras, added motion sensor lights around the exterior, and even hired a security guard to monitor the premises during the night. It gave them a small sense of relief, but the tension remained. Then one night, everything came to a head. It was late, long after closing time, and Marcus and Emma were finishing up in the kitchen. The restaurant was quiet, the only sounds the clinking of dishes and the hum of the refrigerator. They were just about to head home when the security system alarm blared, sending a shock of fear through both of them. What was that? Emma asked, her eyes wide. Marcus rushed to the front of the restaurant, glancing at the security monitor. His heart dropped when he saw a group of figures standing outside, their faces obscured by hooded sweatshirts and masks. One of them was holding a metal pipe, while another had what looked like a crowbar. They're trying to break in, Marcus muttered, grabbing his phone to call the police. As he dialed, the group began smashing the windows, the sound of breaking glass echoing through the restaurant. Emma appeared at his side, her face pale with fear. We have to get out of here, Marcus. They're coming inside. Marcus nodded, his heart racing as he grabbed Emma's hand. Come on, through the back. They sprinted through the kitchen, the sound of footsteps closing in behind them. Just as they reached the back door, they heard the front door being kicked open. Marcus's pulse pounded in his ears as they burst through the back exit and into the alley behind the restaurant. Go, Emma, Marcus urged, pushing her toward their car, which was parked in the lot a few yards away. Get to the car. They ran as fast as they could, the cold night air biting at their skin. Just as they reached the car, Marcus heard a voice shout from behind them. "There they are. Get them." Marcus turned to see two of the men racing toward them, their faces twisted with anger. One of them, the one with the metal pipe, raised it high, ready to swing. "Get in the car, Emma," Marcus yelled, positioning himself between her and the attackers. Emma fumbled with the keys, her hands shaking as she tried to unlock the car. Marcus braced himself, ready to fight, when suddenly the sound of sirens cut through the night. Red and blue lights flashed in the distance, and the men hesitated, their heads snapping toward the approaching police cars. "Damn it," one of the men shouted. "Let's get out of here." They turned and ran, disappearing into the shadows just as the police cars pulled into the lot. Marcus and Emma stood there, breathless and shaken, as Officer Hendricks and two other officers jumped out of their cars and rushed over. "Are you two okay?" Hendricks asked, his eyes scanning the area for signs of the attackers. "We're fine," Marcus said, though his voice was shaky. "They were trying to break in. We barely made it out." Hendricks nodded grimly. "We'll catch them. I'll have my guys sweep the area and check the cameras." "Don't worry, Marcus. We'll make sure they're held accountable for this." That night, after giving their statements to the police and ensuring the restaurant was secure, Marcus and Emma returned home, their nerves still rattled. The reality of how close they had come to real violence weighed heavily on them both. Sitting on the couch, Marcus stared at the floor, his mind racing. He had always known this would be a fight, but he hadn't expected it to escalate to this level. Now, more than ever, he realized just how much was at stake, not just their restaurant, but their safety, their future. "I don't know how much more of this I can take," Emma said quietly, her voice trembling. "I thought we were strong enough to handle this, but tonight—" Marcus reached for her hand, squeezing it gently. "We are strong enough," he said, though he wasn't sure if he was trying to convince her or himself. "But we need to be smart about this. We need to protect ourselves." Emma looked up at him, her eyes filled with a mix of fear and determination. "I'm not giving up, Marcus. Not after everything we've been through. But we can't do this alone." Marcus nodded, feeling the weight of her words. "You're right. We're going to need help." Standing together. The night of the attack had shaken Marcus and Emma to their core, but it hadn't broken them. If anything, it had solidified their resolve. As they sat at the kitchen table the following morning, the events of the previous night fresh in their minds, they knew the time had come to fight back, not with violence, but with the support of the very community that had begun to embrace their dream. "We can't do this alone anymore," Marcus said, stirring his coffee, but barely tasting it. His hand still trembled slightly from the adrenaline of the night before. "It's time we rally the people who believe in us." Emma, sitting across from him, nodded. Her eyes were tired but filled with determination. "We've got more allies than enemies in this town," she said, her voice steady. "It's just that the enemies have been louder. It's time we change that." They had been quiet about the sabotage, trying to handle things on their own to avoid stirring up more trouble. But that strategy had failed. Now they needed to take a stand, to call out the hatred that had been growing unchecked. They spent the rest of the day making calls and reaching out to the people who had supported them from the beginning, their loyal customers, the local businesses that had lent a helping hand, and even Mayor Davis, who had offered his assistance in the past. They knew it was a risk to go public with the threats and the sabotage, but they couldn't afford to be silent any longer. The following day, they held a press conference outside the restaurant. The local news had picked up on the story after the break-in, and a small crowd had gathered to hear what Marcus and Emma had to say. Among the reporters and onlookers were some familiar faces: Sarah from the bookstore next door, Kevin from the bakery down the street, and a few of their regular customers, all standing in solidarity with them. As Marcus stepped up to the microphone, he felt the weight of the moment settle on his shoulders. Emma stood beside him, her presence a constant source of strength. "We never thought we'd be standing here under these circumstances," Marcus began, his voice clear and strong. "When Emma and I started this restaurant, we had one goal in mind: to create a place where everyone, no matter their background, could come together over good food and feel like they belong. That was, and still is, our dream." He paused, scanning the crowd, and saw the expectant faces watching him closely. "But over the past few months, we've faced resistance that goes beyond business competition. We've been threatened, our restaurant has been vandalized, and last night, we were attacked by a group of people who want to see us fail, who want to see us leave this town because they believe we don't belong here." Murmurs rippled through the crowd, and Marcus could feel the tension building. "We've done everything we can to rise above the hatred and keep moving forward," Marcus continued. "But we can't do it alone. We need this community to stand with us. We need to send a message that this kind of hate has no place here." Emma stepped forward, her voice soft but resolute. "We're not asking for special treatment. We're just asking for the chance to run our business without fear. We believe in this town, and we believe in the people here. But we need you to believe in us too." There was a brief, pregnant silence, and then applause. It started with a few claps, hesitant at first, but quickly grew into a full-throated show of support. Marcus felt a rush of emotion as he looked out at the crowd, seeing the faces of people who had come to care about them and their dream. After the press conference, people came up to Marcus and Emma, offering words of encouragement and pledging their support. Kevin from the bakery handed them a tray of pastries with a smile. "These are on the house," he said. "You've got our full support. Don't let the bad apples ruin what you've built." Sarah from the bookstore gave them a firm handshake. "If there's anything I can do, anything at all, you just let me know. I'm tired of seeing good people pushed around." It wasn't just their immediate neighbors who stood with them. Over the next few days, support poured in from all corners of the community. Local churches organized fundraisers to help cover the cost of the damage from the break-in, and the mayor's office worked to increase police presence in the area to prevent further incidents. Even on social media, the tide began to turn in their favor. The press coverage of the attack and the subsequent show of solidarity had sparked conversations online, with many people condemning the actions of those who had threatened Marcus and Emma. Hashtags like #StandWithMarcus and Emma and #NoPlaceForHate in our town began to trend locally, bringing even more attention to their story. But not everyone was pleased. Brad, Tony Brewer, and their group of cronies were furious. They had hoped to push Marcus and Emma out of town quietly, to make them disappear without causing a scene. But now, their hatred had been exposed for the whole town to see, and the tables were turning against them. One evening, after another busy day at the restaurant, Marcus received a call from Mayor Davis. He and Emma had just finished closing up, and Marcus answered the phone while Emma cleaned up in the kitchen. "Marcus, it's Henry Davis," the mayor said, his voice low and serious. "I'm glad I caught you. I wanted to give you a heads up. What's going on?" Marcus asked, his heart sinking slightly at the tone of the mayor's voice. "There's been some talk around town," Mayor Davis continued. "Brad and Tony Brewer have been stirring things up, trying to rally support from their side. They've been meeting with a few folks who share their views, and I've heard rumors that they're planning something. I don't have specifics yet, but I wanted you to be prepared." Marcus's stomach tightened. Planning something? Like what? Another attack? "I'm not sure," the mayor admitted, "but I wouldn't be surprised if they try something drastic. You've made a lot of noise, Marcus, and not everyone in this town is happy about that. But I want you to know that I'm with you. We're with you, and we're not going to let them drive you out." "Thank you, Mayor," Marcus said, though the worry in his chest hadn't eased. "I appreciate your support." "Stay safe, Marcus," Mayor Davis said before hanging up, "and keep your eyes open." Marcus put down the phone, his mind racing. He knew Brad and Tony weren't going to back down easily, but he hadn't expected them to escalate things so soon. That night, Marcus and Emma discussed their next steps. They couldn't live in constant fear, but they also couldn't ignore the very real danger that still lurked in the shadows. They decided to hire additional security for the restaurant, as well as install more cameras around the property. Emma also suggested reaching out to their neighbors to form a community watch group so that everyone could keep an eye out for suspicious activity. The preparations helped ease some of their anxiety, but Marcus knew that it was only a matter of time before Brad and Tony made their move. A few days later, that moment arrived. It was a quiet Sunday evening, just before closing time. The dinner rush had ended, and the restaurant was winding down for the night. Marcus and Emma were in the back office, going over the week's receipts, when they heard a loud crash from the front of the restaurant. They jumped to their feet, their hearts pounding, and rushed out to the dining room. What they saw sent a jolt of fear through them. 3 masked men were in the process of overturning tables, smashing glasses, and throwing chairs across the room. One of them had a bat, which he was using to swing at the windows, shattering them with each blow. "Call the police," Marcus shouted to Emma, who quickly pulled out her phone. Before Marcus could react, one of the masked men turned toward him, brandishing a crowbar. "Stay back, Adams," he snarled, his voice muffled by the mask. "This is what happens when you don't listen." Marcus's blood boiled. He had had enough of the threats, the sabotage, the violence. His mind raced, adrenaline pumping through his veins as he prepared to defend what he and Emma had built. "You think you can scare us off?" Marcus shouted, stepping forward, his fists clenched. "You're cowards. You hide behind masks because you know you're wrong." The man with the crowbar hesitated, clearly not expecting Marcus to stand his ground. But before he could respond, the sound of sirens filled the air, growing louder by the second. The other 2 masked men looked at each other in panic. "We need to go," one of them shouted. The group scattered, darting out the broken windows and disappearing into the night just as the police arrived. Marcus and Emma stood in the wreckage of their restaurant, their hearts pounding as the officers rushed in to secure the scene. Glass littered the floor, tables were overturned, and the front windows were completely shattered. Officer Hendricks approached them, his face grim. "Are you 2 okay?" "We're fine," Marcus said, though his voice was tight with anger. "But they did a lot of damage." "We'll get a full report," Hendricks said, gesturing to his officers. "But I have a feeling I know who's behind this." "Brad and Tony," Emma said quietly, her voice trembling with barely suppressed rage. "It has to be them." Hendricks nodded. "We've had our suspicions for a while, but this is the first time they've been bold enough to pull something like this. Don't worry, we'll find them." The next day, as word of the attack spread, the community rallied around Marcus and Emma like never before. People from all over town came to help clean up the mess, donating time, money, and supplies to repair the damage. Sarah from the bookstore, Kevin from the bakery, and countless others worked tirelessly to restore the restaurant to its former glory. Mayor Davis even showed up with a group of volunteers, helping sweep up the broken glass and offering his personal assurance that those responsible would be brought to justice. "We won't let them win," Mayor Davis said, standing beside Marcus as they surveyed the cleanup effort. "This town is bigger than a few hateful men trying to hold on to a past that no longer exists. We're with you, Marcus, every step of the way." As the community came together, Marcus realized something profound. Yes, there were still people like Brad and Tony who wanted to see them fail, but there were far more who wanted to see them succeed. The outpouring of support showed him that they weren't fighting this battle alone. By the end of the week, the restaurant was fully restored, and Marcus and Emma prepared for a special reopening event. They invited everyone who had supported them, their neighbors, customers, and the volunteers who had helped rebuild. The event wasn't just about reopening the restaurant. It was about celebrating the strength of their community, the power of unity, and the belief that love and kindness could triumph over hate. The evening of the reopening, the restaurant was packed. Families filled the tables, laughter and conversation filling the air. Marcus and Emma moved through the crowd, greeting guests, and thanking everyone for their support. At one point, Mayor Davis took the stage, microphone in hand, and called for everyone's attention. "I want to take a moment to acknowledge Marcus and Emma Adams," the mayor began, his voice ringing out over the crowd. "They've shown extraordinary courage in the face of adversity, and they've never wavered in their commitment to this town. What we've seen here over the past few weeks is a testament to the strength of community. Marcus and Emma, you've brought us together in ways we never expected, and for that, we thank you." The crowd erupted into applause, and Marcus felt a swell of emotion as he looked at Emma, her eyes shining with tears. They had done it. Against all odds, against all the hate and fear, they had stood their ground and come out stronger on the other side. They had built something far greater than a restaurant. They had built a community. As the night wore on, and the celebration continued, Marcus and Emma stood at the entrance of their restaurant, watching the people they had come to love laughing, eating, and enjoying the space they had created. It was a moment of pure joy and triumph. "I think we made it," Marcus said quietly, wrapping an arm around Emma's shoulders. Emma smiled up at him, her eyes filled with pride. "We did, and we're just getting started." They stood there together, hand in hand, knowing that no matter what challenges lay ahead, they would face them together, with the strength of their love, their community, and their belief that change was not something to fear, but something to embrace.